Okay, so we're back with another example of dividing using decimals. But this one is an extra step involved. You'll see later what I'm talking about. So what we're going to do first is make sure that when you're dividing, your divisor is a whole number, which is that number. The number on the outside is your divisor. This, of course, is your dividend, what's being divided. So that can be a decimal or a whole number, doesn't matter. This has to be a whole number though. And we're going to easily fix that by simply moving my decimal one time. Sometimes it's going to be 2 or 3 times depending on where the decimal's at. So for example, if I have given you this number instead, I would have to move it 3 times. But for this number, you just move it once. Now here's the extra step. Now, if the number doesn't have a decimal, all right, and you need to move your decimal, you need to place a decimal somewhere. The only place you can put a decimal is at the end of the number. For example, if you go to the store, sometimes you'll see a price tag priced at $8. Now, some stores will just have this as a price tag. Others will put a decimal and zeros. Because you're allowed to put a decimal at the end of a number and as many zeros as you want. But usually the case is just 2 zeros at the decimal. So remember, when it comes to adding a decimal, you must place it at the end of the number. So right here, I'm going to put it at the end. Right there. Okay. And let's erase this right here. Please don't make the mistake of putting a decimal in the front. That changes the value of the number. You went from $39 to 39 cents. That's a big difference. If I put the decimal there, the value of the number does not change. And I can add as many zeros as I want in case I need to, which I might for this question. We're about to find out. All right, so let's get started and see how many times. Well, you know what? What we're going to do now is I forgot to move my decimal. See, I was already going to make a mistake and start dividing. You need to make sure that if you move it one time here, you must also move it one time here. So now my decimal is going to move to this place. And if you see a gap like I have right here, I want you to remember eggs in your egg carton. This is what I'm talking about. So when you see a gap there, you can always fill it up with a 0 or the egg. And this bottom part would be the bottom part of the carton. So let's fill that up with a 0. Okay, my computer's freezing, but there, got it back to normal. Hopefully it doesn't freeze again. So I'm going to put a 0 here. And then you can leave your work like that, but I prefer to clean it up. So let's clean it up. Now, this decimal is optional. You could leave it there or get rid of it. But for this decimal, it must be left where it's at. So you must leave it there. We're almost ready to divide, but one more step. This decimal at the end, you must shoot it straight up. And then you can begin dividing. So finally, we can start dividing. Let me put this here to help me memorize that I'm going to multiply whatever number I have on top with this number. So first, let's ask ourselves, how many times does 3 go into 3? One time. 3 times 1 is 3. Subtract, you're left with 0. Then you drop down your 9. Now we're going to ask ourselves, how many times does 3 go into 9? 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. You subtract, you end up with 0. You're not done yet. Your next step is to get your 0 and bring it down. How many times does 3 go into double zero? Well, that's an easy one. 0, none. And there's your answer, 130 or 130.0. So remember, when you're dividing, make sure you move the decimal the same amount of times to make this outside number a whole number. And whatever you do to the outside must also be done to the inside. And one more thing, once you have the decimal in its new position, make sure you shoot it straight up, and then you can begin dividing. Here are all the steps again. Bring this down so you can see everything. And there's my answer, 130.0. Let's do one more question involving division. This is a word problem, and this is more of what you're going to see in the STAR test. Your questions don't usually look like this, where it's all nice set up for you. You have to read carefully. Make sure when you're reading a question, you circle your numbers and also any keywords. The word per. When you see the word per, more than likely you're going to divide. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you might have to multiply, add, or subtract. But in this case, Adam, he bought this much of orange juice. And each ounce of that orange juice he bought cost 6 cents. So we want to find out, well, then, how many ounces did Adam actually buy? So this right here signals that it's going to be a division problem, right? And what's going to be divided is the cost of the orange juice by how much each ounce costs, 6 pennies. So we're almost ready to start, but before we begin, make sure you put your numbers in the right place. The first number must always go on the inside. The second number must always go on the outside. Dividend, divisor. All right, so, and just like the previous question, we need to make sure that the number that's on the outside must be a whole number. Well, it's not. So we're going to fix that by moving it 2 times. In the previous question, it was just 1 time. In this case, it's twice. 1, 2. And again, whatever's done to the outside must also be done to the inside. So I'm going to move it 2 times. Let me clean up my mess. Or you can just leave it there if you want. It's optional. Now, if I erase this, you can leave the zeros behind. But since they're to the left of the number, you can erase them. If they're to the right of the number, they're off limits. You're not allowed to erase them. But they're on the left side, so let's avoid the clutter. Let me clean this up as well. But make sure you leave behind the decimal in its new place. And we're almost ready to divide, but one more step. That decimal, you're going to shoot it straight up. And now we can finally begin dividing. All right, so how many times does 6 go into 1? 0. I go into the next 2 set of numbers. So now instead of looking at just 1, I'm going to be looking at 17. How many times does 6 go into 17? 2 times. 6 times 2 is 12. You subtract, you're left with 5. Then I bring my next number down. I got 51. Now, how many times can you put 6 into 51? For some of you, that might give you a hard time. Either A, use your multiplication chart, or B, use your answer choices. Sometimes your answer choices help you figure out what the next number is going to be. Or let's apply some common sense. If you look right here, they all begin with 2, just like I have right here. The next number down the line is 8. Now, it doesn't always work out like this, but if it does, use your answer choices, to help you guide on what number to use next. So it has to be 8. So that's what I'm going to put next. 8. 6 times 8 That's going to give me 48. And if this number is smaller than that number, then I'm on the right track. And I'm going to subtract. Let's do that. 1 is too small for 8. I borrow from the 5. 5 becomes 4. That 1 I borrowed over carries over. This turns into 11. I subtract. 11 minus 8 gives me 3. 4 minus 4 gives me 0. Uh-oh, I'm not done yet. So I have a new problem here. 6 is way too big for 3. So what I need to do is make 3 bigger. And the way that's done is by getting here at the end and adding a 0. Remember, I can add as many zeros as I want. But for this question, I just need one more. Just add that extra 0, you drop it, and now 3 becomes 30. How many times does 6 go into 30? That's an easy one, 5, but if you forget, again, use your answer choices. Look, the next number here is 5. So I'm going to use 5. Let's make this small so we can see the word problem and the question at the same time. Let's shrink this down. There we go. So 6 times 5 gives me 30, and I'm done with my question. My answer is going to be 28.5, which is D. Now, had I forgotten to put the decimal above the beginning, let's say I forgot to do that, I might make the mistake and choose B as my answer, because that's what I have right here. But luckily, I remembered to shoot your decimal straight up. This is my real answer, D. So always be careful with that decimal.